Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Grow Yourself from the Inside Out. Today we're going to talk about a topic. I've got just a really terrific guest who is going to talk to me and you and us about a topic that, I hear a lot about. I speak about. It's not my area of expertise, but it certainly falls into a lot of things that I uh, not just talk about, that I want to understand and that I want to be better at, if you will. And so the topic is on, you know, maybe take the title from another book called The Power of Now. And I'll tell you about my guest book in just a second. But it's the whole idea of being in the present, the whole concept of mindfulness. We hear more and more about these ideas. But I'll tell you, my guest, he wrote a book called Now-ist. And and he really puts it in language that, one, resonated with me. I haven't finished, completely read the book, but I started it, and I can tell you it just really resonates. There's certainly some depth to it, but there's also practical aspects to understanding the now, the power of now, living in the now, living in the present, being mindful, all these other sorts of things that we talked about. And so, and I will say, my audience here knows that I'm a practicing Christian, and I have to say, I sometimes am concerned about guests when I hear that they're talking about mindfulness and these sorts of things. And I do find a fair amount of people out there talking about mindfulness, and I don't, not to begrudge them, but I don't know that they really have this depth of knowledge that my guest has on this subject. And so we're going to go in all kinds of directions, as I always do. I didn't send him questions. He and I chatted about what we're going to chat about, but this is just going to be as raw as they all are. But I'm sure you're going to absolutely love this. So, so who is my guest? My guest is Billy Mandarino. He's out in California. Billy's an author, he's a speaker, and he calls himself a Now-ist, teaching people to become more aware of the gifts in the present moment. His hit book, The Now-ist, which I can't wait to get into, is really full of wisdom from his own journey. The inspiration and truth that Billy presents in his book is and can be, life changing. So it's life changing because he dives into really this deeper side of being in the present and living in the now. And so it is really a great, great pleasure to bring on my guest, my special guest, and hopefully my new friend, Billy Mandarino. Billy, thank you so much for taking the time to be here, and greetings from Nashville.
Thank you, Kevin. Wow, that was a really generous, kind intro. I appreciate that deeply.
Well, I don't
I'm
think I was
honored.
generous enough, honestly, but yeah, you're
No,
welcome.
man, I'm so honored to be here and serve you and your audience. And it's my gift to be of service, I guess, to the world and to be of service to everybody of like mind and heart, and just keep shining the light on what
Yeah.
it means to live in the present moment. That's really my mission. I feel like God has given me that mission.
Well, and I'm going to ask you about that mission in just a second. But before we get started, let me just ask you the question I ask all my guests. Who is Billy Mandarino? Where do you come from? How did you end up in your current state?
Wow. Well, Billy Mandarino is, I guess, somebody who is seeking as a spiritual sponge. Like I kind of call myself as a joke. I'm a spiritual sponge. I've just felt like ever since I, was born in this big, beautiful Italian family of six kids. I had some trials and tough times as a kid. My mom and I got divorced
Mhm.
when I was very young, 7 years old.
Mm.
Had to sit on the stand at 7 and look at my mom with her lawyer, my dad with his lawyer, and pick which one I was going to live with. I
Wow.
remember that being a real pivotal point in my life at 7, just thinking we were raised in the church. So I was like, wow, I really, unlike, I mean, not to disparage my brothers and sisters, but I just
Sure.
really, I knew that that was the way. I needed to go deeper into scripture, into prayer, and learn about that part of how I connect to the Spirit, the Holy Spirit. And that helped me through a lot of trials and tribulations and trauma and stress. And it didn't stop there. It was like the beginning. And so I continued to be this spiritual seeker and diving deep into what it meant to be in connection with God and Jesus and the Holy Spirit. And so that continued to grow in me. And this spiritual sponge, if you will, just kept filling up and filling up. And life gives you more challenges and, physical challenges. And I'll tell you a story about that maybe a little later, about last year, how I was paralyzed and had to learn how to walk again,
Oh,
and had
yes.
a
Okay.
dramatic transformation deeper into that spiritual journey, which I called my spiritual practice just this time last year. When I walked out of that hospital with just a cane, it taught me so much about me. But ultimately, talking about the spiritual sponge, it rang out in the form of this book, The Now-ist.
Mm,
I've been the spiritual sponge. It just kind of rung out. And this teaching is my spiritual memoir about how I found the present moment to be the most
mm,
powerful part of our lives that we don't connect to enough.
mm.
Most people live in stress and overwhelm and anxiety and fear and doubt. And I just realized that the present moment is the power that you have to
Yeah.
outrun all of that negative
Yeah.
energy that overtakes this world, especially coming out of 2 years of the pandemic.
And don't start. There's you're gonna bring up more questions than we have time for me to ask you about what you were just saying. So let me. I can't help but to ask. So then, does your spiritual sponge overflow with?
Oh my gosh, it so much so that the avalanches of abundance have come into my life since this calling. I answered this calling from God. It was this calling, and
Yeah.
I could not answer it. I mean, the word nowist didn't exist. It just came through me. I just felt like God just gave me this inspiration.
Yeah.
Says, this is your purpose. This is really why you're. I mean, I have a gorgeous wife and a gorgeous daughter, and we've been married 27 years, and family is everything. Coming
Congratulations.
from a big Italian family, family is everything.
Yeah.
And that, I mean, the greatest day of my life when my daughter was born and marrying my wife. But this purpose is just taking me over in the sense that it serves all of it. It
Yeah.
serves me emotionally, socially, spiritually, financially, societally. It just fills me up to be of service. I think we're all here, Kevin, to be of service anyway. And that's our great mission, is to find out how are we supposed to serve our fellow brothers and sisters? How are we supposed to do that?
I think that's such an incredible question that gets, that is, suggested in a lot of books and a lot of people. I don't know that. I'm not sure that the average person um, understands that, and I might even include myself. So, anytime I talk about these things, I'm not, pointing at other people, but I think the question is often asked. Why? What's his name? Rick Warren, asked the question, why on earth are we here? And so I'm going to ask you about that. I think it's such an incredible question that I'd love to hear your perspective. But first, I want to ask Billy. So, what do you, maybe in a concise thought and statement, which we'll explore more, but, you know, what do you want people to know? What is your message to the world? What is Billy's message to the world in essence?
The essence of the Nowist teaching is encapsulated ultimately in this thought that we are separate from everything that's missing in our life. We're separate from each
Oh,
other. We're separate from our mission. We're separate from our purpose. We have to compete with all the Joneses, all of our neighbors and friends. We have to compete with the society to accomplish something, to be something, to become something. And the reality is, I think that you've heard it said many times, we're not human doings, we're human beings. But we're
yes.
so caught in the seeking and the doing mode that I feel like the nowest mission is to learn to connect to the beingness that you are, the one that you come from. When I work with young minds, 12 to 16 years old, and I do talks in person, I've done them over Zoom during the pandemic, but I have this simple
Nice.
concept. Kevin, what is NOW spelled backwards?
Juan.
Yes. When you're in the now, you've won. You've
Oh,
won your
goodness.
presence back. You've won the power over this moment. And also, it's a
Hmm.
homonym, ONE, one. One moment
One.
in time, one present moment that you can connect to at any time you choose to. The problem is this ratio. It's a little
Hmm.
math. I mean, 90% of the day I live as a nowist. I live in present moment awareness, and I live connected to God and to
Hmm.
the oneness and my mission and my purpose. But 10% of the day, stuff goes sideways. It hits the fan. I get stressed. I get overwhelmed, but I correct quickly. The problem is the inversion of that. The opposite is true. Most people live 90% of the day in the doing and the seeking and the stress and the overcoming worries and problems and challenges. And 10%, They might connect through prayer or meditation or service or kindness. But when you can learn to live in that ratio, that's what a nowist is. That's what I teach, is how to live in that ratio.
Yeah, goodness. I mean, I would certainly suggest or completely agree with you. I would also say, and many of those watching this podcast might say, that's impossible to live 90%. And I'm going to ask you about this again, but I'm going to pop the cover up on the screen while you're talking. So how do you live in the present more consistently? And I'll just pop it up for just a second here. How do you live in the present more consistently?
So the nowist, the subtitle is Finding the Signs to Your Ultimate Desires in No Time. Right?
Very
I
interesting.
call
Yes.
those signs, those spiritual breadcrumbs that show up, or synchronicities that show up, these serendipities that show up in our life.
Mm,
But I want to tell you about my life a little bit right now.
please.
What's happening on right now in my life? And I don't say this to be braggadocious, Kevin. I
No.
want to tell you how I live day to day. I'm a property manager. I manage about 100 properties. I'm also a realtor. I sell quite a few properties a year. I have a beautiful wife and daughter. We've been married 27 years. I'm also a single digit golfer. I love playing golf tournaments. I'm also a musician. I've written my wife and I'm sorry, my wife, my other wife, my musical soulmate, Kirsten, my bandmate. We created we spent a year diving into this record that we created. So doing that, and then promoted last year our Now-ist Experience Live, which is a live event. We wrote 10 songs that are all around the Now-ist teachings. And then last May, we had a 2-day live immersion seminar. This year it's coming up again, May
Wow.
13th and 14th. Quick plug, BillyMandarino.com. Tickets are on sale.
Please.
We're offering discount, early bird discounts. Anyway, I say all this, and I tell you all this because I do all of this with that same 90-10 ratio. I am able to create massive abundance in so many areas of my life. Then I teach. I help underprivileged kids. I mean, I go into the classes and deal with kids with stress. I work with charities. I do what I can to be me and be part of this mission that is this Now-ist mission, and to create this legion of Now-ist. So I do all that with that same 90-10 ratio. And you think, Kevin, and your listeners and viewers, how is that possible?
Yeah.
But there's this crazy thing when you can get out of this illusion of time, as Einstein calls it, when you can get out of the past future mode. I don't believe in goal settings. I speak to a room of 100 students, and the teacher like rolls her eyes and like holds her breath when I say, class, I don't believe in goal setting. And then I extrapolate on that, and they understand what I mean by that. And so living in that mode of present moment awareness as a way of life, not as a religion, as a practice into presence, that is so powerful that you can do so much more living in that stress-free ratio that I talked about. And all you want to do, and I love this great Persian poet named Hafiz, he says, just look at the sun. The sun never says to the earth, you owe me. Just imagine what a love like that can do. It lights the whole sky.
My.
And that's the kind of person and being, not a human doing, but the human being you can become by living in this ratio and living in this present moment awareness as a way of life. And then it's so crazy, Kevin, all of the things that you called problems before, challenges, they become your spiritual practice.
Wow. And we spoke about this briefly last week when we chatted, and I asked you about the flow state, and I thought you had some really interesting ideas that we're talking in the relative same realm, right? The flow state being, that in order to enter, well, instead of me preaching, let me ask you, how do you define the flow state, and how is that connected to the sort of the nowist, the practice of being a nowist?
Well, to be in the flow, I think of that, and right now it's coming to me like in the golf context, because I have a golf tournament coming up. I just love playing golf because
Yes.
any golfers out there, you understand it's probably the most difficult game ever invented. It's so frustrating. It takes time. But this game has become a spiritual practice for me, if you will.
Interesting.
Because in golf, if you can only you have to focus on that one shot at a time. You have to use your imagination, your present moment, tension-free energy to pull off a golf shot. When you're competing against somebody else, that creates even more stress. So for me, it's like an analogy. I mean, your opponent or the person you're playing is kind of like the world pushing up against you and giving you difficulties and challenges. And how are you going to respond to those? So to get in that flow state from myself when I'm in the golf, and it's just an analogy for life. Golf is simply an analogy for life.
Yes, agree.
If you're having what's called a blow up hole, you get like an 8, or they call it a snowman in golf, on a hole. and then you know, are with your opponent, and you focus on that terrible thing that just happened to you on the last hole, and you take that energy and that thought and that mindset into the next hole. It's like a stacking effect. All of a
Wow.
sudden, you're on this negative, you know, train, if you will, and you can't jump the tracks. But we do that in life. We have problems and challenges. We just keep living. This is another analogy I love for, you know, I have a car with a huge windscreen, Kevin, and it's so big. It's called a panoramic windscreen because you can see so much. But
Hmm.
there's this little teeny, like, I don't know, 2 or 3%, you know, rear view mirror that's right there. And if I'm going 70 miles down the road and I'm looking in that rear view mirror trying to go forward, I crash my
Mm.
vehicle every time.
Wow.
And I don't only
Yes.
hurt myself, I hurt other people, right? You run into other people,
Yes.
pedestrians, other cars. And that's how a lot of people, I think, live their life, looking in that rear view mirror, trying to go forward. So to get into the flow state, you have to live in the present moment without your awareness focused on the past, because the past, usually, if you focus on it, will just be your future will be a replica of that past. So to get in the flow state, you have to use one of the greatest gifts that God has given us, which is the power of our wonderful human imagination. How
Mm.
do you use your imagination, your vision,
Yes.
to focus in this present moment on what it is you want to bring into your life? Not thinking about goal setting and past and future and this chronological timeline that we live in. The shift is to get in the vertical. And then when you can take that past and future and you can cross it, that crossification, that moment, that's the now. So when you get your awareness out of past future thinking, you think vertically, that crossification is the present moment, and you can enter it at any time you put your awareness there. So
Whew.
people are in stress, they forget that they're in stress because they're not aware. But awareness is the key to becoming a nowist and getting out of this past future trap.
Wow, that's powerful. And I've heard, you know, and I've even, you know, stated this, that and I think I'd mentioned to you that I teach tennis to young middle schoolers. I coach a middle school team, and every now and then I know they are saying Coach McNulty's off on one of his little philosophical ideas that we care nothing about, because you can just see them kind of looking at me, you know, and oh, whatever he's saying. But I tell them that I relate ideas that I've learned from other professionals, be they on television or other professional coaches that mentored me, and that I've always heard this statement that to be a, you know, one of the important elements of being a really good tennis player is having a really bad memory.
Mm,
Meaning,
that's true.
as you just said, you know, that you have to you just fought off this really hard, you know, rally with your opponent, and you know, and it's really tight. The match is tight, and then you lose the point, and it was a really important point. And how then do you forget about that? How do you
Mhm.
just let it go and move on? And isn't that, though, an analogy to life about, you know, we have to remember the past. I mean, we can't get away from that. We have to think about the future. But how do you maybe translate that analogy of forgetting the past as you operate in your daily life?
I like to think about it, Kevin, as you know, the past is this wake that's been left behind. If you're on this boat, you know, and it's just a trail that's been left behind, it's not your energy. Your energy, you know, is
Mm.
it
Oh,
present. I
interesting.
learned this actually from a great teacher named Dr. Wayne Dyer. He
Mm.
used that analogy about a boat. And it's just a trail that's been left behind. It's the present moment energy of the boat that's allowing the boat to go forward, right? That's the energy. But if we keep focusing on that
Oh,
trail that's
interesting.
behind, it's dead energy. It's over. There's no energy. It's just a wave. It's just this past energy field, and it's a dead energy. So why don't we put our energy, the power of our powerful heart and our imagination, connect in what's called coherent thinking and coherent beingness, where you live with your thoughts focused on what it is you want and your heart connected to that intention. That is the present moment energy that propels you and gets you out of that negative flow of focusing on the past, hoping the future is going to be different. And it creates this thing called stress. And stress doesn't exist. It's just people thinking stressful thoughts. It doesn't exist. It doesn't, I can't put it in this glass right here and say, hey, there's
Yeah.
stress. That's what's killing most of the planet. Heart
Yeah.
disease is the number one killer. Cancer is number
Yeah.
two. Hospitalizations number three. Majority of those are caused by stress. If you look at statistics, that this amorphous phantom thing called stress, it is just a thought form, is what's killing the planet.
I absolutely agree with that. That's a powerful thing that you're saying there. And, you know, so I mean, how do you? So how does a person then, who is more prone to let's take me
You're right
or
here.
or or others, that tend to be skeptics and cynics, all which can lend itself to negative thinking. Now, I'm of the mindset that being skeptical and cynical are important aspects of our life, characteristics that because we see things maybe in troubles, but then there's a point where it goes too far. Or somebody who just tends to, whether it's nature or nurture, grew up with a really negative mindset. How do they, you know, how do they take this concept of stress that doesn't exist, as you say? And I don't disagree with that. I mean, it is a thought. In fact, I remember listening, I was listening to an audiobook. It was by Wayne Dyer. And he was talking about, problems really aren't problems. They just exist in your head, essentially, is what he was saying. I think it was in the book, The Shift, if I'm not mistaken. But,
Great book.
how do you manage that? How do you negotiate this idea that somebody who maybe this is a little bit of their way of life, yet they want to be stress free or more stress free, perhaps live more in the now.
So it all goes back to habits, right? I love William Wordsworth. He has this beautiful quote: "Not choice, but
Mm,
habit rules the unreflecting herd." And I'm going to say it again, so hopefully your listeners or viewers
please.
write this down. William Wordsworth: "Not choice, but habit rules the unreflecting herd." We're ruled by our habits, and we're in this
Mm,
herd mentality. So it's a negative collective energy because we don't have awareness about our habits. And that's day one of my seminar. I teach awareness because awareness is the key. The minute you know you're in stress, you can find your way out of stress. But if you don't have that awareness, if you're just ruled by your habits and you drone along and do the same thing you did the day before, you got the same cup of coffee, you hit the same phone, the same phone, you pick the same phone up, look at the exact same text message and the email stream, you have this habit.
hmm
And you go to the door, you whatever, you let the dog out, you get your coffee. You have these habits that don't have awareness and they don't have presence in them. You don't set yourself up to kind of quote unquote win the game of life, right? When you're in the now, you've won. Being a now is
mm,
someone who has such good habits, and they're not difficult like any habit. You just have to start. You have to be aware. You have to start these new habits because what happens, you get this stacking. Then you get this beautiful subconscious spiritual immunity that happens to deal with stressors, to deal with habitual ways of life because 95, 96% of everything we do is with our subconscious mind. But what if, Kevin, you made your new habit a habit in building up the spiritual immunity to deal with the stressors of life, to deal with the disappointments, to anticipate what's going to happen because you're already prepared. I mean, if we have a moment, I could tell you this story that I was leading to earlier.
please.
What happened last year? My wife turned 50. I love you, honey. And she doesn't mind me telling this story because
You're a brave man.
number,
I'm pretty
yeah,
sure my wife would come right through my door and say,
yeah,
"What did you just say?"
probably. And my wife's not here right now. So unless she sees this replay, but she knows I tell this story because
Yeah.
it's the truth. And she
Yes.
also wants people to learn from the challenge that I had last year and the
Sure.
near death experience and the paralysis I had last year. So my wife turned 50. We flew to Miami because California was locked down, as most of the country was locked down, but Miami was not locked down. And I
Right.
couldn't have the party I wanted to have for her because we were locked down. And so I said, okay, she loves the beach. She loves warm weather and warm water. And Miami, I've been to a conference there a couple of years prior, and we stayed at the beautiful Fontainebleau Hotel. And the singer Nelly had this big, kind of special New Year's Eve party, which is New Year's
Interesting.
Eve and her birthday all the same day. Awesome. Everything she likes: the beach, warm water, sunshine. Miami is awesome. This gorgeous hotel. So they're setting up this massive grandstand. Turns out they said it was too windy. They pull it down, and everybody was supposed to be socially distanced, but they threw it inside in this 33,000 square foot ballroom.
Wow.
Still a 20-foot distance from the tables. Maintain that distance. You had to wear your mask. People were standing behind your table to make sure you didn't go to the dance floor because there was no dance floor. They didn't want you to make an impromptu dance floor. Long story short, we have a great time. We fly back about, I think it was January 4th or 5th. We came down with symptoms.
Oh
And
boy.
turns out we both got COVID.
Oh
And
wow.
then we gave it to our 15-year-old daughter. So our whole house was COVID. My wife and daughter healed up in a little over a day. And I was right here in this bed for 10 solid days with 102 fever every night.
Oh goodness
And the
gracious.
doctor said, man, if he doesn't break this fever, his cough, which it was dry at the time, is going to become wet. He's going to get what's called COVID lung. And so at this time, Kevin, I hadn't told any of my family members because my dad, who's 80, just had open heart surgery. And I didn't want my family, my brothers and sisters, and all of our massive, network of family members of prayer and love to pray for me when my dad is the one who's kind of fighting for his life with this open heart surgery. He's 80. Goodness. My dad is the toughest cowboy you'd ever meet in your life. Real quick sidebar. He had open heart surgery. Then he got an appendicitis from the surgery and had COVID all about a month or two. And he's stronger than ever. He pulled through it. He's the rock of our family. But then
Way to go, Dad.
Yes. Pa. I call him Pa. He's the greatest Pa in the world. So I'm here in this bed. And I'd say, hey, one of the best lessons from this was I've learned that I couldn't do this alone. Yes, I'm the spiritual teacher. I'm this Now-ist. I love teaching this and being of service to the world, teaching them presence, but I can't do this one alone. And the wrong thing for me to do was to keep prayers from me because I needed prayers. Because if I didn't break this cough, I was going to the hospital. Back then, you did not want to go to the
hospital.
Correct. No, but anyway, so ultimately, I told all my family, my sisters, brothers, they all prayed for me. The next day, I broke my fever and I healed up. I got this rapid healing and I quarantined for almost 10, 12 days, whatever it was. Felt great. Love to golf. I go outside. I played 9, 10 holes. My 25-pound pack is on my back, and I walk around. I have a good round, come home, go back to sleep. The next day, I wake up and I'm numb head to foot. I can't feel my fingers, my face. 2 days after that, I lost the ability to walk.
Oh,
a couple of trips to ER. It turns out that from COVID, I was the only one in the county at the time to get Guillain-Barré syndrome, or GBS for short, from COVID. Basically, it means your immune system eats all the insulation around your nerves and paralyzes you. So I'm claustrophobic. I have a lot of fears in life, but I'm claustrophobic. I had to spend 4.5 hours in an MRI tube. And I had to pray, chant, sing. It was almost harder than the paralysis to be in that. I called it my COVID cocoon because I was like in this iron cocoon. And I just kept imagining myself out. I used a lot of the Now-ist teachings, the meditation, the Now-ist prayer that I created, the Now-ist meditation, the singing, the chanting, the visualization, using my imagination to get out of this time-bound world and in the quantum and 3 miles above the earth, be in space. So after that, they decided after 4.5 hours that they didn't have enough information. So they spinal tapped me and found out that I had this Guillain-Barré syndrome. So 21 nights in the hospital, couldn't see my wife and daughter, couldn't have any visitors. And by the grace of God and by the grace of those amazing doctors, a world-class service I got at Cottage Hospital here in Santa Barbara, and then thousands of people were praying for me that I didn't know were praying for me. Because my good friend, who's a medical journalist, wrote this story about me while I was in the hospital. It was on the front cover of our local newspaper. And all these people found out about it. So it was crazy, Kevin. I could feel my heart getting really hot when I was paralyzed in my bed. And I remember one time my heart started beating 138 beats per minute because I saw it on the thing. And they ran in there, thought I was having a heart attack. It was the prayers, Kevin. I could feel prayer. And the prayer coupled with what the doctors did to save my life. 21 then I had to learn to walk again. I was 21 nights total figuring out how to walk again, getting healed of the Guillain-Barré syndrome. And I walked out of there last February 16th with a cane. 2 weeks after that, I was golfing again. And it's a miracle. And it was a miracle that the doctors can't figure out because 5% of people that get Guillain-Barré have that kind of outcome. I was very fortunate.
Wow, man. Yeah, I'm obviously very happy for you and that you obviously, you have a story to tell behind that to help other. But let me ask you then about the power of prayer. I mean, as a Christian, I pray all the time and we talk about these things, but how do you see prayer? How do you see prayer? How does it work in your way of thinking? And even more when you talk about this collective, and we do this all the time. I remember, I'm in the South, man. I'm in Murfreesboro. And I remember when we first moved here, actually out from California. And I remember we went to a T-ball game where my oldest daughter was playing. I think she was like 4. And something happened to, I believe, the umpire maybe, or it might have been one of the coaches. And the dude just drops, and there was an assumption that he was having a heart attack.